Hello, I am Matt Williamson at Williamson NFL. How's everyone doing? Good. So about Cooper Kupp and to another degree, Steelers wide receiver situation. So there are Vegas odds out right now, and I just tweeted this like a minute ago, that if you were to bet on where Cooper Kupp plays next year, next team odds, there's teams like the Commanders and Patriots and Chargers and Broncos on there with pretty good odds. Dallas, that don't pay huge. But the two that pay the least, thus making it the favorite of where Cooper Kupp lands, are the Bengals, which would make some sense considering Higgins could be on the move, and your Pittsburgh Steelers. They're the best odds of where Kupp lands. And I'm very interested, to be honest with you. Very interested. So, what is he as a player? He's had some injuries. There's no question. He's not young. No doubt about that. He has had a lot of wear and tear on his body. He's mostly a slot, but he is a big, very physical slot. He's like 220 pounds, rocked up. And I'm going to mention Allen Robinson's name a few times because he's coming from the Rams as well. But like Robinson, but even more so, he's a great blocker. I mean, like, he will crack down on defensive ends in the run game. I mean, that's part of the Rams scheme, but he does that extremely well. And he always has. And he's big and he's physical and he battles for the football. And he ain't what he used to be, though. I mean, it wasn't long ago that he won the Triple Crown for catches, touchdowns, and yards that Jamar Chase won this year. A couple years ago, that was Kupp. Well, Nakua's clearly gone past him with the Rams. And that doesn't mean he's shot, though. And it doesn't mean that he's to the Allen Robinson level of shot. But I think he would cost you almost exactly the same as the A-Rob deal, like a 7th-round pick. And here's why. I mean, they told him he is going to get moved. He's not happy about it, but oh well, he wants to keep playing. His new team would pay him under the current contract $12.5 million a year, which the Steelers absolutely have. Now, if he was on the open market with his most recent tape, would he get $12.5 a year? Probably not. That's why he only costs a 7th-round pick. You don't have to fight other teams for him. But he's almost a $30 million cap hit for the Rams right now, and they can't afford that. So they're going to move on from him, basically whatever they can get. I'm interested. I absolutely am. I'll throw you a 7th rounder. The Steelers don't have a 6th. They have 2 7ths. They have a 5th. They have 1 through 5. They don't have a 6. They have 2 7s. I would have thrown you a 6. That's about as best as I can do on a deal like this, because you're basically buying his contract, and I do think several teams, I mentioned a lot of them that are the Vegas odds, should have interest in Cooper Kupp. What would he provide here? I think he's more than a slot, and he's certainly a big slot. He's a different type of slot than Roman Wilson or Austin, obviously. I mean, times 1,000 difference. I mean, polar opposite. Closer to Freiermuth than he is to those guys operating out of the slot. But a huge key to me is he would be the adult in the room. I think that's something they need to add this offseason. I'm pretty certain that they will add a veteran receiver at some point. It might not be T. Higgins, but a veteran in the room in kind of a Hayward Bay-like approach, but a much better player. And Robinson provided that too. High character guys that have been around the block. Robinson, Kupp, these guys have been to Pro Bowls. They've been really good players. And Kupp's better than all of them. But he would be the adult in the wide receiver room. And namely Pickens, and obviously Wilson's young too, and Austin's not old, and might draft another one. Some maturity and some professionalism in that room would go a long way. And I still think he can play. I don't think he's phenomenal, but I think that he would have caught a lot of balls here if he can stay healthy. Again, you're eating up cap space and you're hoping he stays on the field. But ideally, I don't think he's, the only thing you do there. And I'll get back to that here in a minute. BetOnline is your world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds in-game live betting, BetOnline provides you with all the action, ability to watch games as they happen, with the largest selection of odds on everything from football, NBA and college basketball, NHL to UFC and MMA. You probably can even bet on Cooper Kupp to the Steelers there. Head to BetOnline today and get in on the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. BetOnline, the game starts here. Okay, hypothetical. You trade for Kupp today. 7th round pick, or both 7ths, whatever. 7th this year and a 7th next year. Chump change draft picks. Kupp is now a Steeler. You owe him $12.5 for the rest of the year. You could still restructure that if you wanted, if you're pretty happy with the guy, but you probably wouldn't do that until deep into training camp when you're like, oh, I've worked with this dude a ton. He looks healthy. Love the player. Love his influence on the team. Okay, whatever. But anyway, let's just say you owe him $12.5 this year. Okay, you add him to the room that has Austin, Wilson, Pickens. And I don't think Jefferson's going to be back. I don't know about Mike Williams or Skoranek. I can make a case for both, but I'm not going to stand on the table for either. But then what? It's not enough. I mean, that's not saying your receiver situation is done, even if Roman Wilson would turn into a star. But you don't know that, I mean, you still have to attack free agency and the draft saying we probably need another receiver. I also think that there is a way more than 0%, way more % chance that Pickens gets traded. I don't think he would yield you a 1, but I bet you'd get a 2 and a 5 or a 2 and a future 3 or something like that. And we'll talk about that more down the road. But this would be step 1 of making a Pickens trade easier. There's a lot of receivers this year that you could trade for, including Tyreek Hill, DK Metcalf, Deebo Samuel. Now, some of those guys are a little up in age. The free agency class is led by Higgins and Godwin. That's going to be rough waters to charter. I mean, it's going to be expensive for those guys. And then there's a bunch of dudes like Keenan Allen and Hopkins and Diggs that were once, like, if this was 2022, this would be an amazing free agent class. As always, the draft is plentiful, but it's a little less than it has been. You're not going to get McConkey in the second round. It's not as good as class it's been the last few. But if you go in with Kupp at $12 million, didn't cost you a pick, you could trade Pickens. Maybe you sign like a Slayton, who I like as a downfield dude, at around 12-ish, somebody like that, and then use a second-day pick on a receiver if you were to move Pickens, and maybe even make out in terms of adding draft capital. Now, I'm not saying they have to trade Pickens, and we'll talk about this more, but I absolutely see the thought process of, we got to pay this guy soon, and I don't trust this dude to pay him. And if you're going to move him, it has to happen to really maximize your value. You have to trade him basically between now and the trade deadline midseason. But how often are the Steelers in a position at the trade deadline to be dumping dudes? Basically never. And I think you'd like to trade him if you're set on that. If you've decided you're not going to re-up him, if you're not going to extend him and make him a $25 to $30 million a year player, which I could see why the organization wouldn't. He is volatile, to be kind. Then you have to move him soon. And I'd prefer to do it before this draft and maybe even before free agency. But adding Kupp would be a good step in the right direction. in that, okay, we got something more in the cupboard. The cupboard. And if you do want to keep Pickens and aren't in any rush at all to move him, hey, Cooper, why don't you be George's big brother and see what kind of influence you can have on him? And we'll draft one in the second or third round. I mean, I could live with Wilson, Austin, Pickens, Kupp, second or third round pick. It's way better than it was. Way better than it was. And that second or third round pick would be a bigger body to me. And I'm done on the Austin Wilson sized receivers. But there's a lot of options. And I know you guys have heard this since Ayuk and Kirk and Tyreek and blah, blah, blah. Oh, they're going to get a receiver. Well, I do think that their receiver room is going to be a lot different. And the biggest reason is, it's not a direct quote, but it's pretty darn close, that Mr. Rooney's press conference to wrap up the season, I think his exact words were, there will be changes at wide receiver. Now, that's vague, but that could mean I'm not paying George. And we're going to add 2 or 3 more with George gone, you know. So there will be changes. And if I'm right on what it would cost for Kupp, I like it a lot. I mean, again, if it's an Allen Robinson type of deal, I like it a lot, no matter who your quarterback is. It's a good start. You at least got something, you know. You didn't get shut out like they did this past year. And you wouldn't. I mean, even if you can't make any other deals, you'll draft one too, you know. So, I mean, at a minimum, you go into the draft with Kupp, Pickens, Austin, Wilson. Maybe you do bring Mike Williams or Skoranek back at league minimum. And you draft one in the 3rd or 4th round with size. That's not terrible. But there's a lot of options here. And this is one I would strongly consider right off the bat. And frankly, if you did make the Kupp trade, and then you trade Pickens for a 2nd and a 5, you could basically turn those picks to Seattle maybe and turn them into DK Metcalf. Now, I know you'd be getting older with these moves. It's okay. I mean, finding young receivers every year in the draft isn't hard. I mean, if all of a sudden your receiver room went up a couple years in age, that's not a hard thing to get out of the way of going forward. You could draft in the 1st round next year, the year after, the 2nd round, whatever. There's always receivers in the draft. Never forget that. But this isn't the best year to be shopping in free agency or the draft. So it might be time to be a little more creative. And if you're set on Pickens going, which I would understand, it would be a hard thing to overcome on the field, but you could. I mean, it's not crazy to think a 4th round pick, Wilson, Austin, Metcalf, and Kupp are your receiver room. Okay, that's still better than it was last year. And you don't play a lot of 3 receiver sets. Give it some thought. I like the idea of at least kicking the tires with the Rams, if not more, you know, being aggressive here. And maybe he's shot and it turns into an Allen Robinson type of deal and you eat some cap space and he's hurt and he's never on the field and, okay, it costs you a 7th round pick. They have the cap space. It really isn't much of a risk at all, you know. So I'm sure other teams will view it the same way, and I'm not going to go spend a ton on the guy, obviously, but the receiver room is going to change, and this might be a very good step in the right direction. All right, everyone. Thanks. Take care.